Good morning, class, and today we're going to talk about Barbados, slavery, and Gullah culture. Again, you need to make sure that you are watching these videos and that you are doing the assignment that's associated with them. So, up next, we have the Caribbean connection. All right, so Barbados is an island in the Caribbean. So, there's a connection between South Carolina and Barbados. So, Spain controlled most of the islands in the Caribbean, but England had colonies there as well. And their most successful colony in the Caribbean was the island of Barbados. Still beautiful and gorgeous, as you can see in this picture that's on the side right here. All right, so in the 1640s, settlers thought that Barbados was the perfect climate to grow sugar cane. It became the cash crop down there in Barbados, and settlers began to use slaves to grow sugar cane and use strict slave labor codes to control their slaves. Barbados is not really a big island, but they did grow that sugar cane. It's about 21 miles long and 14 miles wide. So people were willing to leave Barbados because it was overcrowded and there was little opportunity for poorer whites that came there. So a lot of them picked up and moved to South Carolina. So that's that connection, all right? All right, it became a model, Barbados did, became a model for the other colonies as well. Because the Carolina settlers brought their slaves with them. So when they left Barbados, that already had that structure there for slave codes, and you can look at those in your textbook. Um, they had a structure for slave codes already in Barbados. So when those settlers left Barbados and came to Carolina, they brought those slave codes with them. Okay, so that's kind of what we see developing in the colony of South Carolina, the slave codes that are based on the slave codes from Barbados. All right, so a little bit more about the island. You can see it right there. Let's deal with slavery now. African Americans played a significant role in the development of the economy in South Carolina. That economy was based on a plantation system. Again, the economy is how you make your money. So their economy was based on the plantation system. There were a lot of crops that required a lot of workers to cultivate the land. And you can't think about it the way it is now because now we have tractors and we have different machines, we have irrigation and whatnot that we can use to cultivate land and to grow crops, but it wasn't like that then. They used human labor, okay? And that required a whole lot of workers, and people did not want to pay. So indentured servants did not necessarily work for the South because you needed more people. And those indentured servants, again, could be set free after a certain number of years. So they also tried Native American slaves, but they were not used to cultivating the land because remember, in Native American culture, who did most of the farming? It was the women. The women did most of the farming. So Native American slaves did not work when it came down to cultivating land either. And those Native Americans knew how to escape as well. All right, so additional slaves were forced in through the Middle Passage. So what ended up happening was Great Britain and those slavers, they would go to the west coast of Africa and get slaves. People were sold into slavery and marched across Africa and brought to that west coast of Africa, and they took them to the Caribbean, to the auction block, to auction those slaves off to the highest bidder. Right? Africans brought the following knowledge with them, though, so they were very knowledgeable. They were not, our ancestors were not ignorant people. They had a lot of knowledge that they brought with them. They brought the knowledge of how to cultivate land. They also knew how to tend cattle. They knew how to cultivate rice. And they had all these things when they came because on that west coast of Africa, again, that's a good area for growing rice because, again, you have those swamps and those tidal waters that are there. All right, so Africans were used to harvest naval stores and lumber from the forest as well. So they were very skilled people, very knowledgeable. Okay? All right, so more about slavery. So we see this picture of the triangular trade route there on the side. The plantation system caused an increase in the usage of slavery because plantations were larger places that grew cash crops as opposed to a subsistence farm that would grow just what you need for your family and a few more people. The plantations were huge. So the more they grew cash crops and the richer people got, the more plantations they had in the South, in the United States, or in the colonies. So they needed more slaves to harvest those crops for them. So in 1690s, a large-scale importation of slaves began. So this is where you start seeing people pour in. A lot of them came in through the port of Charleston in South Carolina. Okay, so a lot of our ancestors actually came in through a few places, one being the port of Charleston, South Carolina. All right, rice and indigo demand grew more, so more slaves were needed. So people wanted that Carolina gold and they wanted their cloth dyed blue. So those plantations expanded, and you know that they were offering subsidies to grow that stuff. So more people were getting into the plantation business, and they needed more slaves, so they imported those slaves in. Okay. All right, let's take a look at this picture. This is a picture of a slave plantation from Barbados. So, what do you think is being portrayed in the slave painting from Barbados? Just take a moment and look. All right, so let's continue. We're talking about Gullah culture. So, yeah. The African slaves brought by the Barbadians had a rich heritage of music, dancing, wood carving, storytelling, folk medicine, and worship. And these people have become what we know today as being the Gullah, that are mainly in Beaufort. And we hear a lot about Gullah in South Carolina history. All right, so additional slaves were forced through the Middle Passage from the west coast of Africa by way of the West Indies. So those people stopped in Barbados, then they brought them up to uh, the south, right? Okay, these Africans brought a knowledge again of cultivating rice and of tending cattle. And they also came from many nations or tribes and spoke different languages. But once they got in America, they began to create a common language that we know now today is called Gullah. And Gullah is a mix of several African languages and English. And if you watch that Gullah video
It's
that I
4 o'clock.
posted, if you watch that Gullah video that I posted inside of your portfolio, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when it talks about the Gullah dialect and the Gullah language. Okay. All right. More about the Gullah culture. Their home is in the Sea Islands of South Carolina and also Georgia. All right, the West Africans, they grew rice before slavery. So they weren't just, people that just didn't know what they were going to do. All right, so they knew how to grow rice. So the Gullah people and their culture were allowed to flourish because they knew what they were doing. Okay, they sought these folks out to grow that rice for them, and they were able to do what they needed to do in the daytime, and then in the afternoon they had free time. So their culture was able to flourish. So plantation owners, like I just said, assigned daily tasks instead of close supervision. So they didn't have a lot of close supervision like we think of now with the slave master on the back of the horse, whipping people, telling them to pick more cotton. This was rice growing, so those people already knew how to do that. So they were assigned daily tasks. So it was a task system. Okay. All right. So they preserved more of their African heritage. So a lot of things we see today are a result of Gullah culture, like fishnets. They also brought quilting with them, basket weaving, as you can see that young lady that's in that picture doing. And they also brought a great variety of food with them. So things that we think about now, like shrimp and grits and all that good stuff, is part of Gullah culture. All right. Make sure if you need to, you rewind this video and watch it and study your notes.